Did you know that some of your favorite video games contain urban legends that have been pondering the thoughts of gamers who know about them for years? Hey everybody, my name is Feather, and in this video we're going over 5 video game urban legends that may or may not be true. Feel free to leave your opinions below and consider sticking around if you like the content. And without further ado, enjoy the video. Endless Mode Mystery, Mega Man 9. Mega Man is a long-running franchise that has gotten a lot of attention throughout the years. And though there are many different releases, this urban legend pertains to 2008's Mega Man 9, which incidentally is also a favorite for fans of the game. Shortly after its release, a now ex-employee of Capcom revealed to the public that there was a hidden secret not yet found. Now, fans were quick to speculate some unlockable character or level, but Capcom denied such claims and decided to give everyone a clue, stating that the secret was hidden in the Endless Attack mode, which is simply a game mode where players go through an endless sequence of randomly generated levels until they die. Some more statements were given from Capcom hinting that the secret would be revealed once a player had made it far enough in the game mode. Now here's where it gets a little weird. In 2009, the employee who had first told fans about the secret thought that someone might have actually found it when a player on the leaderboards reached the max score of 99,999. Now the player is able to keep playing past this point, however the score will no longer go up. But that very same high score was actually deleted not too long after from the leaderboards. The ex-Capcom employee gave one final and possibly big hint, stating that players who made it to 7,000 screens were halfway there, which could possibly mean that the secret was somewhere in the 14,000th screen. However, it's been almost 15 years now, and we still know nothing new about the secret in Mega Man 9. While browsing some forums online, I found discussions on some people believing it to be a hoax that was put forth by Capcom, and they were backing up that idea with the fact that data miners digging through the game's files were unable to find the secret. But if this isn't a hoax, this is up there with some of the longest running undiscovered Easter eggs in video game history. Who are you running from? Gameboy Camera. Nintendo's Game Boy needs no introduction. Over 100 million of them were sold worldwide, and I'm sure you probably had one, or at least had a friend that owned one, but you probably haven't heard of the Game Boy Camera, and if you did own it as a kid, well, you might have come across a terrifying Easter egg. The Game Boy Camera was a game, or in my opinion, it was an add-on to the Game Boy that allowed you to take some really low quality pictures and edit them using this kind of crappy software. After sliding this camera into your Game Boy though, you'd actually realize that there's some mini games. In the menu screen, you had 5 options: shoot, items, magic, and finally, run. If you click the run option, there is a 1 in 320 chance that an image of a person with drawings on their face would show up with the message, "Who are you running from?" Now, as a much older person with access to the internet, these pictures aren't actually that scary. They're a little unsettling or weird, but these images actually scared the shit out of little kids in America, and it would have probably scared me too if I came across it at the time. Now, people had a lot of questions. Why were these pictures in the game? Well, it seems that everybody has different opinions to that. Some say that it was just a silly Easter egg, and some other people think it's a reference to actual real-life events. There's even a Reddit post from last year from user Humane Boyfly, who thinks it's a reference to the album Burning Down the House by the Talking Heads. Either way, it's just a odd thing to put in a game, and it's even more weird that the outcome of the photos are based on a 1 in 320 chance. Lavender Town Syndrome. This story has been widely covered for some time now, and I'm sure you've probably heard of it. However, I'm still going to tell it as if you didn't know any of the details. The anime series Pokemon was extremely successful, and lots of people loved the show. Lots of people still love the trading card game, and how can you forget about the Pokemon games for the original Game Boy? Pokemon Red, Blue, and Green released for the Game Boy back in 1996. All 3 versions are slightly different, but the games were widely praised upon its release. But there may be a way darker side to the game, specifically in Pokemon Green and Red. Now, before I start talking about the details, it's very unsure where this story originated from. Supposedly, it comes from some type of forum board around the time of 2008 to 2010. In the game, there's a location called Lavender Town, a tiny little village with a really weird and eerie vibe, and its purpose is to be a burial ground for Pokemon. Now, what really gives Lavender Town its eerie vibe is the unsettling music that plays around the village. It's actually got a nice little indie vibe to it, in my opinion. Now, years after its release, rumors would begin to spread that the music in Lavender Town on the green and red version of the game contained very high frequencies that only small kids or young teens could hear due to their more sensitive hearing. As the story goes, when kids in Japan would hear the high frequency tone in Lavender Town, they would suffer from nosebleeds and severe headaches. But even worse, it's said that around 200 kids, we'll just say they unalived themselves after hearing the music in the town. Now again, I have to emphasize, this story had probably come from a popular forum at the time such as 4chan, and many regard this story as nothing more than a fictional creepypasta. However, in 2010, possible evidence had surfaced that something very sinister was hidden in the level of Lavender Town. A YouTuber posted a video using a software to look at the spectrograph of the music in Lavender Town, and what he found was possibly more frightening than the music itself. When the music of Lavender Town is played through the spectrograph, the audio showed images of the unknown Pokemon with some hieroglyphic looking letters that translate to "leave now." Now, while it seemed to be solid evidence at the time, it had raised some suspicion due to the fact that the unknown Pokemon didn't appear until the release of Pokemon Silver, Gold, and Crystal, which was almost 5 years later. So some believe that the audio was edited by the YouTuber and is simply a hoax. And I know that the whole story is really interesting in its own spooky way, however, it's widely regarded as a story that started out as a creepypasta and got passed on to other people who tried to claim that the events actually happened. But as far as real life events go, there is no news or evidence of kids in Japan harming themselves after hearing the tone in Lavender Town. However, the developers did alter the music for the rest of the versions released for Pokemon Red and Green. And while it's very likely that the audio could cause headaches if you listen for a while, that's probably about the only harm it'll cause. Columbine Map, Doom. On April 20th, 1999, the infamous event took place known as the Columbine High School Massacre, and that whole story can be a video on its own, but we're here to talk about some speculation between the two shooters, Harris and Klebold, and the classic 1993 video game Doom. Shortly after the high school massacre, the police had gathered tons of information about the shooters through their personal journals, and a discovery that the two boys were obsessed with the game Doom. They also found out that they were creating their own levels. Once information of this had hit the public, there was some speculation that Klebold had actually created his own level in Doom that was an exact replica layout of the Columbine High School, and the two boys would get together and practice their plan of attack in the game before doing it in real life. Now, it is true that one of the boys, Harris, did indeed make numerous levels in the game, but these are said to be poorly made maps with little or no correlation to the school. Another fact that denounces this theory is that the gaming engine used to run Doom wasn't very strong and would have been incapable of creating levels with multiple floors, such as the high school had. Now, it's kind of in the air whether or not they did make levels to practice the shooting on. However, I actually do believe they made levels based on the school to plan their attack, as it just seems like, to me at least, that would have been one of their earliest ideas since planning the shooting. And as far as the game engine's lack of power, they still could have made separate levels focusing on each floor. Either way, whatever my or your opinion is, it's still a dark and sad piece of history, so let's get on to the next urban legend. Okay, I know it seems like some of these entries may be a little far-fetched to call them urban legends, but there is no doubt about this one, and it's such an interesting story. According to the urban legend, in 1981, a time when new arcade games were very rare, a brand new arcade game showed up throughout several different suburban areas in Portland, Oregon. The game was called Polybius and became very popular very fast among players who would keep coming back for the game, and there was always a bunch of people lined up waiting for their turn to play Polybius. The story goes on that one day, men in black looking characters were seen tampering or collecting data from one of the machines, and allegedly it was to test the game's psychoactive response, because a lot of the people seemed to be addicted to the game in a sense, and those very same players had allegedly suffered from side effects such as seizures, amnesia, hallucinations, and more. Like I said, Polybius gained immediate traction, but after just 1 month of its appearance, it vanished from all arcade rooms throughout Oregon. Most times when people discuss what company made Polybius, the name is usually actually Sinneslotion, which from what I understand, this is a German term meaning sensory deprivation. But that word in and of itself is fishy, and we'll get into that just a little later, but keep it in mind. Now, while researching for this video, it is pretty unclear where the origins of this story started. It could have been that it started on the internet sometime in 1994, but due to the lack of internet at that time, it could have just been passed on from person to person and wound up on the internet later on. Now, if we go back in time, the earliest known record of this game comes from an entry on a site called coinop.org. It seems that the website was made to show information about all the arcade games from the past. And yes, Polybius actually has an entry on the site. The person who made the entry describes the details of the game as follows. This game had a very limited release, 1 or 2 backwater arcades in a suburb of Portland. The history of this game is cloudy. There were all kinds of strange stories about how kids who played it got amnesia afterwards and couldn't remember their name or where they lived. The bizarre rumors about this game are that it was supposedly developed by some kind of weird military tech offshoot group, used some kind of proprietary behavior modification algorithms developed for the CIA or something. Kids who played it woke up at night screaming, having horrible nightmares. According to an operator who ran an arcade with one of these games, guys in black coats would come to collect records from the machine. They're not interested in quarters or anything, they just collected information about how the game was played. The game was weird looking, kind of abstract, fast action with some puzzle elements. The kids who played it stopped playing games entirely. One of them even became a big anti-video game crusader or something. We've contacted one person who met him, and he claims the machines disappeared after a month or so, and no one ever heard about them again, until the ROM showed up. For anyone who's unaware, in the basic sense, a ROM is almost like a downloadable game file. It's the same way you can play older games for free on an emulator, which is just a simulation of a machine, say the NES for example. So if you got the ROM, you pretty much got the game, and that's a big deal in this scenario. Here's what we found so far. Found English strings, insert coin, and press 1 player start. Looks like a 1 or 2 player game. Text in the game says copyrighted 1981 Sinneslotion, maybe a German company. If anyone has heard any additional information about this game, we'd appreciate hearing about it. Now, the rumors of the ROM file would spread around on the internet for quite some time, and you could probably already imagine the stories. People whose friends worked with the government and they got the ROM file. Oh yeah, my dad has a friend and his coworkers uncle has the ROM, and some people saying that they even developed Polybius themselves or helped in some kind of way. There was always a story, but there was never any evidence or any gameplay. Now that site, coinop.org, claims to have a screenshot of the main menu, and some regard this as probably the best physical evidence of the game. That is, of course, if it's real, which many don't believe it to be, including myself. Through the screenshot, we don't get much information besides the fact that games at this time would have never used such high detail for their lettering in the main menu. So either it's a fake or the game was just ahead of its time. By 2003, more people had become fascinated by the story of Polybius, and eventually the game appeared in the video game magazine GamePro. The magazine only helped push the story farther along, and sometime after that, several different people came forward, all claiming to have some involvement in Polybius. In 2006, a guy named Stephen Roach claimed that he had been one of the original programmers for the game. He claimed that the company wanted to develop a game which had cutting-edge graphics. However, according to him, early upon its release, a young boy suffered a seizure from playing Polybius, and in a panic, the company pulled the game from the arcades. While Stephen Roach has no actual evidence for his claims, he did provide some interesting information about the supposed gameplay, but we'll get to that a little bit later. Now, everything that we just talked about is pretty much all the origin information that we know about the game, and now we're going to talk about the actual investigation and what the true story of Polybius most likely is. Snopes.com is a site that catalogs urban legends. They gave their opinion that Polybius isn't anything more than a modern-day rumor of the common Men in Black rumors that were spread throughout the 1980s, and more rumors were just piled on top of it. Rumors such as Polybius was a government experiment and that they were sending subliminal messages through the game. Throughout all these 20-something years of the game's rumor, there have been no magazines or mainstream news from the early 1980s that give any mention to the game. There has also yet to be one authentic finding of the physical arcade game, or any ROM files for that matter. So in short, there is sadly zero evidence for this game's existence. Researchers who've studied the topic of Polybius believe the story to be nothing more than an urban legend cooked up out of a mixture of influences at the time of the 1980s. Now, there actually is some official reports of 2 players getting sick on the same day in Portland. One of those players had actually collapsed and had suffered a migraine, but that person was playing the game Tempest, not Polybius. Another person at the same arcade had suffered from stomach cramps, but that was after playing Asteroids for 28 hours straight in an attempt to break the world record. So as far as getting the outrageous symptoms reported from Polybius, these cases were a lot milder and were probably just blown out of proportion. As far as the Men in Black collecting data from arcade games, this in a sense is actually true, but not for the reasons you might think. The FBI had raided several arcades in that area just 10 days after the report of those 3 boys. The reason for the raid was due to the FBI suspecting the owners of running the arcade machines for gambling, and so in their investigation they were checking if games had been tampered with and were also keeping records of high scores. Now, it is more likely that some rumors from these 2 stories were made and passed down to what now became the story of Polybius, a government game that caused severe damage to the brain and was taken by Men in Black soon after. I also want to touch on the development name Sinneslotion, which when looked into is actually a name that a non-German speaker would generate if they tried creating a compound word using an English to German dictionary. So the game probably has no German origins whatsoever. Well, sure, that could all be true, but what about the people who actually claim to have played Polybius? An internet writer that goes by Patrick Kellogg thinks that players claiming to have played Polybius might actually be getting it confused with the video game Cube Quest, which was also a game that was quite ahead of its time. The components of the arcade game were heavily based on something called a laser disc, which, well, wasn't very reliable, and as a result, this game would often break down and be taken out of the arcades. So as you can see, you kind of have everything here to create a horror story, and you just need a little bit of imagination. But that still leaves one final question: who created the story of Polybius and why? Well, there's a video game journalist named Stuart Brown who asked this same question, and what he concluded was that 1, the legend of Polybius began no earlier than the year 2000, and 2, that Polybius was a hoax put forth by Kurt Culler, the owner of the website coinop.org, in order to bring more traffic to his website. Stuart Brown also said that through his searching, he has found no evidence of the game before the year 2000, which happens to be the very same year that the Polybius post was made to coinop.org. The owner of coinop.org, Kurt Culler, has never discussed anything about this, and the legend of Polybius still lives on. Of course, many people consider it a hoax, but there are still some who believe it to be real. After all, this is quite tame compared to the other things the government has done. However, there is a good ending to all this. Some developers got together and made their own version of Polybius. They had help from a man named Stephen Roach, who, as I mentioned earlier, claimed to have helped develop the original Polybius game, and it's still free to download on Sinneslotion.com. There was also a release of the same idea for PlayStation 4 back in 2017. Hoax or not, I really enjoyed researching for this story. It kind of reminds me of the Crystal Cove story, which I was a huge fan of. Either way, the urban legend of Polybius has left its mark and has gotten many references throughout movies and shows. And Polybius was our final story. So with that, I'm gonna have to say goodbye and thank you for watching.